The time being 10:08, we'll get started. And I want to thank Representative Malloy for filling in today on the clerk duties. And first up, we have Department of Safety. Oh, ready?
It's going to be good.
The quote. Good morning. When you're ready, if you'd introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes.
My name is Amy Newbury, and I'm the Director of Administration at the Department of Safety. And with me today is Jennifer Hall. She's the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Road Toll within the Department of Safety and the Division of Administration. And today we're presenting an overview of the Highway Fund, the unrestricted revenue collections. And so today I'm going to start with-
Excuse me, Representative Almy, did you have a question?
Yes, could you repeat that very slowly, the names, because we don't have the names here?
Of course. So I'm Amy Newbury.
You might want to just pull that, slightly closer to you.
I'm the Director of Administration at the Department of Safety. And with me is Jennifer Hall, and she's the Bureau Chief of Road Toll. So, thank you. So on page 2 of your PowerPoint, you'll find an overview of the Department of Safety, the mission and the vision statement, as well as the organizational structure. And so while you see all 7 divisions listed, today we're really going to focus on the Division of Administration, which is where the Road Toll Bureau is, and the Division of Motor Vehicles. And as far as how we're going to present today, I'm going to start with an overview of a revenue, it's kind of a summary of the highway revenue. And then Jennifer is going to speak to the Road Toll Bureau. And then we're going to stop and take a pause and answer all of your questions on the Road Toll Bureau revenue collections. And then I'll go into the Division of Motor Vehicles. So on page 3, we want to highlight the 2 primary sources of unrestricted funding for the Department of Safety: highway funds and general funds. The highway funds, totaling approximately $263 million, are generated through a variety of revenue streams. These include state gas tax collected through the Road Toll Bureau, as well as motor vehicle registrations, driver licenses, motor vehicle certificates of title, vehicle inspections, and other miscellaneous revenues. So let's begin by discussing highway funds. If you turn to page 5, you'll see the total highway funds collected in fiscal year 2024 amounted to $263.9 million. This exceeded our planned projection of $259.9 million by $4 million. For fiscal year 2025, we're projecting highway fund revenue collections of $261.2 million, which is approximately $800,000 more than the planned $260.4 million. While highway fund revenues have seen a modest annual growth rate of 0.51% between 2018 and fiscal year 2024, this increase has not kept pace with the rising cost that these revenues are intended to support. These funds are critical for supporting the Department of Transportation's work on New Hampshire roads, as well as several key functions within the Department of Safety, including the Division of State Police and the Commissioner's Office. This gap between revenue and growth and cost increases has resulted in structural deficits within the highway fund. The revenues are no longer sufficient to meet the operating needs for which the fund was designed. To address the shortfall, you may remember that between fiscal year 22 and 23 biennium, the legislature transferred 50 million in general funds and an additional 10 million was transferred in fiscal year 24-25 biennium to ensure that it could remain balanced for the upcoming biennium. Now I want to turn things over to Jennifer Hall, Bureau Chief of Road Toll, who will share more details about the road toll operations.
Thank you, Amy. The road toll operations consist primarily of collecting the motor fuel tax. We call it the road toll. And we also enforce compliance through our field audit division within the Bureau. The road toll law is not related to the toll booths on the turnpike. That's a common misconception. We get calls all the time asking if they can pay off their Easy Pass balance. So we're completely separate. That system is operated by the Department of Transportation. We administer approximately 153 motor fuel distributor licensees, 61 motor fuel transporter licensees, 1,679 international fuel tax agreement licensees, and 229 oil discharge and pollution control licensees. We turn to slide 7. The point of taxation for our motor fuel tax or road toll here in New Hampshire is at the distributor level. So the product comes in to terminals. We have some terminals here in New Hampshire, or it will come in by truck from out of state. But it must be distributed to a licensed distributor, and then through their filings with road toll, they tell us where that product goes and the taxability of that product. So some of the transactions that occur that make it a tax-free event are sales to other licensed distributors or sales outside of the state of New Hampshire. So if they export the product, they get the credit on that road toll. And that's pretty much it for the, once they drop the product into the retail station, that is a taxable event, and then the road toll is collected at that point based on that distribution. Turn to slide 8. Factors impacting the estimates for road toll: price. After reaching a high of 4.996 cents per gallon in June of 22, gas prices have declined and seem to have stabilized for now. According to AAA, the average price per gallon in New Hampshire as of January 28th is 2.974 cents per gallon. And this is down. The slide says up, but that should actually say down. 0.076 cents from last year's average of 3.05 cents per gallon. The U.S. Energy Information Administration forecasts motor gasoline prices to decline from the average of 3.2 cents per gallon in 25 to 3.02 cents per gallon in 26. The Energy Information Administration also expects crude oil prices to average $72 per barrel in both 25 and fall to $64 per barrel in 26. The weather impacts our income for fuel tax. Dry summers and snowy winters help to drive our tourism in New Hampshire, and that increases our fuel consumption here. A lack of snow or warm temperatures in the winter months results in lower fuel consumption in the winter. The economy: the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the real gross domestic product has increased at a rate of 3.1% in the third quarter of 24. And in the second quarter of 24, it increased at a rate of 3.0%. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported in January of 25 that the consumer price index for all items rose 2.9% from December of 23 to December of 24. So those are all factors that can impact our income on the road toll. And then on page 9, we just have a graph of past historical revenue and expected revenue for FY25 through FY27. In fiscal year 24, we collected 127.9 million in revenues, which was 2.9 million more than the planned 125 million. In FY25, we're projecting to collect about 127.7 million, an increase of 2.1 million from the planned 125.6 million. The FY26 and 27 projections assume a 0.2% increase overall for the biennium due to the incorporation of electric and hybrid vehicle surcharges that took effect in September of 23. And then we have a breakdown of the road usage fees over on the right-hand side at the bottom of the graph there for you. And I guess at this point, we'll pause and take questions related to the road toll operations.
Yes, Representative Elberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Can you just expound a little bit on the IFTA? Something I have not heard about.
Okay, yes, so the International Fuel Tax Agreement
Page 6.
is an additional license that carriers who haul using vehicles that weigh over 26,000 pounds or have 3 or more axles, so the heavier vehicles that are putting more wear and tear on the road have to obtain an additional license, and we administer those licenses. So they used to be, it used to be that they would have to get permits for each jurisdiction to travel through and pay the appropriate tax to use the roads in those jurisdictions. The International Fuel Tax Agreement has made it more consolidated so they can pick a home base state and just file their mileage and fuel usage per jurisdiction to that home base state, and then that base state disperses the tax to the other jurisdictions that the carrier traveled in based on a prorated system.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just, I guess, ask a question on page 6 also. Those licenses, are those all yearly renewals?
All except for the oil discharge and pollution control license. That one is perpetual until they no longer need the license.
So it's a one-time fee? Okay.
Well, so they pay monthly fees based on the products that they're selling. So they
I
file
see.
monthly reports and pay fees based on that, but there's no actual licensing fee on top of that. They just pay into the funds that the oil discharge and pollution control license collects for.
Thank you. Representative Ullery.
Yeah, just to warn the oil pollution, that goes into a dedicated fund, does it not? And that's for remediation.
Correct.
So it doesn't affect the general fund monies. It
Correct.
goes
That's
directly-
completely separate, and that's handled through Department of
Yeah.
Environmental Services.
And then you take from that, if, and an error takes place someplace and there's a leak, and you use that to
Mitigate. Yeah.
just so that we understand that.
Representative Spar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm new to the committee, and I was just on, if I understood you, you said that in 2023, the general fund gave 50 million to cover the costs that were not, that exceeded revenues, and you said 2024 was 10 million. Just so I understand, historically, is it usually, or is it an objective of the department to be self-sufficient? What's sort of the objective and or expectation?
As far as I'm aware, that was the first time those transfers had happened. It's that the expenses have, the revenue has not kept up with the increasing expenses against the highway fund.
Follow-up?
And when the revenues do exceed the expenditures for the year, what happens to those excess funds? Do they stay in the department? Do they go back to the general fund? How does that work? Do you know?
So if there's any unexpended appropriations, that lapses back to the highway fund, because these are highway fund dollars that are being expended here. If their expenditures are exceeding the revenue, they would need to make adjustments within the department to adjust for that. So they may need to decrease some of the activities that they're doing, or they need to get more revenue added to their foundation. They would need to go through a supplemental bill to do that. But so for the most part, the department doesn't have an issue when you give them the budget of having not enough funds for that. The highway fund sits over here. From that highway fund, several departments benefit from those revenues. They budget their expenditures based on what they believe those revenues will be. So, does that help? Representative?
Follow up? Do you? Okay. Representative Breyer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. First question I had is, could you give me an update on the dyed fuel enforcement program and how that's going and what the status of that is?
Yeah, we just recently hired a a part-time fuel enforcement officer so that we can, better address the concerns with inappropriate use of dyed fuel, proper taxation of the fuel being used in vehicles on the roadway. So he just barely started, I believe, on Friday in this position. So we're working to get him up to speed.
Follow up. The other thing I remember is I'm assuming you're still utilizing the IRS to do your dyed fuel sampling.
Currently, yes. Yep.
And I was curious of, is there any possibility, and that'd probably have to be a discussion with state police, is there any possibility of moving some of that dyed fuel testing into the state's forensic lab to kind of make it a little more efficient for road toll to get the testing results back?
Thank you for the question. It's not a current conversation, but it's certainly something we could explore.
Okay, thank you. One more.
Follow up?
Were you able to fill all your audit positions before the hiring freeze?
The audit positions, all the ones that were posted we have no vacancies that we're looking for on the audit side.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Bors?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Thanks for taking my question. So how much fuel does the average vehicle use a year?
You're asking for fuel consumption or road
Yeah,
toll?
on average. My thought is if it was 1,000 gallons, the average vehicle would donate to the state $22 in taxes, if I did the math in my head correctly.
So our
Two-
estimate.
Did I say 22? 220. $220 in taxes. So I'm thinking the electric vehicles are only paying $100 surcharge. Hybrids 50. Maybe we need to consider raising that if we need revenue. I mean, their use on the roads, I think the average electric vehicle weighs 3,000 pounds more than a fuel powered vehicle. So maybe that's something we need to consider.
So
Well,
we
that-
did do estimates when the bill was being proposed for the registration fees, and used, an average vehicle, average MPG. I think it was 12,000 miles per year. And it worked, the numbers worked out to $112 and some change annually in the road toll amount. So that's how they came up with the $100 registration fee.
Very good. Closer than I would have guessed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. You may proceed. Oh, did you? Okay. Okay.
You were gonna.
Yes.
Any possibility that you could get back about the lab doing dyed fuel testing? Okay, thank you.
Oh, 9 and 11 look similar.
Let's now discuss DMV revenues, which are a key component to the highway fund. So on let me see. On page 11, on page 11, you'll see that motor vehicle registration revenue in fiscal year 24, we collected 93.1 million, which was 2.9 million above our planned target of 90.2 million. Looking ahead, we're projecting 90.4 million in revenue for fiscal year 25. These figures represent the state's share of registration fees, which are collected at by the state and deposited directly into the highway fund. It's important to note that while we're seeing a dip in motor vehicle registrations year to date, this could be due to a combination of factors. This could include economic conditions, demographic shifts, potential policy changes, or the rise in alternative transportation options and increasing environmental conditions. As we continue to monitor these trends, we'll be able to better understand the impact on future revenue projections. If we turn to page,
Before, if
sorry.
you don't mind, I do have a question here, Representative Ellery.
You mentioned collecting DMV taxes at the local town clerk's office. And the way I understand that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is a fee is paid by the registrant, vehicle owner, to the town clerk for the privilege of doing it in their town. Then there's a fee paid to the state, and then there's a fee paid. So it's a three-component tax. Is that correct?
I
Or
believe
fee?
in the part that I'm reporting on, it's only the state share going into the highway fund.
Right. So the numbers you're giving us are monies that are going into the general fund, not minus any percentage going to the town.
Correct.
Yeah. Just wanted to.
It's the highway fund,
Yeah.
going into the highway fund. Yep.
Representative Elmy?
Thank you. I believe I'm remembering correctly. We, quite a long time ago now, we changed the registration requirement from 4 years to 5 years. And one of the effects of that was that every 5th year there would be a dip. Is this dip still occurring?
The dip is still occurring, and I'm going to get to the impact of that and when we'll start actually seeing that dip fade.
Oh,
There is
I'm sorry. We seem to have a couple more questions. Oh,
there's a I
Okay.
will get Representative Almy. There's a slide on that, and I'll get back to your question.
But that is also a factor.
okay. Representative Elberger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. The little chart at the on the bottom right corner on page 11 indicates registration fees, and I'm hoping that the second line goes from 0 to 3,000 pounds, then 3,001 to 1,500. I assume that's a typo.
Oh, I apologize. I will follow up.
Thank you.
I think it's 5,000.
Yes.
No, it's 5,001 and that's one.
Representative Doucette?
Seeing that we cracked the seal here, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. I'm wondering if you're taking into account, and I'm just kind of thinking about this. I know my vehicles are getting older, whether this accounts for a lot more older vehicles being registered where that fee goes down. Have you taken a look at what that impact may or may not be in relation to what you predict
That's the
It-
going forward?
You bring up a good point. It very well could be.
Good point. I just had someone point out that may be the town tax portion that goes down
Mhm.
and not the state.
Just-
Yes, Representative Ellery?
Yes, just again, break that down. There's a tax, which is which the number she's reporting here. Then there's a fee, which is paid to the town. And that is a sliding scale fee based upon vehicle age and weight and all that stuff. And then there's another fee for the privilege of not having to go up and bother the people in Concord when you register or pay your state tax. So one tax and two fees, three charges, one bill.
Okay. Representative Elmy.
Thank you. I've been here a long time. And when I started, we were engaged in increasing, or rather when we started up Ways and Means again, we were engaged in increasing the, this tax. And every time we did this, the trucking industry would come in and would argue us into cutting in half the increase for them. And after we did that, they would go to the Senate and get the other half taken off. So I am not now, and I was not then sure whether we were righting a wrong for the trucking industry or whether we were just being taken. Do you have any idea of what the relationship is now between the fees, which I don't think have gone up since about 8 years into that period? So about 20 years ago. No,
I am not aware.
thank you.
Yes, Representative Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Newbury. I'm sure we'll let you get back to the rest of your presentation just shortly. I just have a quick question
Of course.
that you may or may not have handy. On that same page that Representative Elberger was talking about, slide 11, that chart, the registration fees, I'm wondering if you could provide us information on the percentage or the gross number, whichever makes more sense, for each of those weight categories, so that we have some idea. So of the registration fees, what percentage are in the 0 to 3,000 pounds category? What percentage are in the 3,000 to 3,001 to, I'm assuming 5,000, et cetera, through all the categories?
I will follow up with the DMV.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions, you may continue. What, now you have a question?
Yeah. Well,
All right, one more question.
Of course.
what the hay? Or straw, depending upon the time of year. Nothing in this gives us any idea of the total number of vehicles that are on our highways on any given day because we're a tourist state. Is that correct?
I do not have that information.
And the other answer, or other follow-up would be, if I may,
Follow up.
there's no way to get that information unless we surveyed every single day, correct? Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay, you may continue, please.
On page 12, and Representative Almy, this gets to your question. Motor vehicle operator revenues, which include driver licenses, have stabilized. These revenues have experienced cyclical dips due to the transition from 4 to 5 year licenses, but we anticipate that these dips will level out by 2036. Effective May of 2025 is the federal deadline for Real ID compliance, which may also drive additional activity as individuals upgrade their licenses. On page 14, inspection revenues, which follow a biannual fee structure, remain steady at around 4 million in 1 year and 3.9 the next. Page 15, plea by mail was added to the highway fund in fiscal year 20. In fiscal year 24, we collected 5.6 million, which is 682,000 less than the plan of 6.3 million. In fiscal year 25, we are projecting to collect 5.8 million, which is a decrease of 514,000. And finally, on page 17, while general fund revenues are not a major focus, they total around 8 million annually. These revenues have decreased over time as certain functions, such as mechanical licensing, has transitioned to other departments. They're in OPLC now, and therefore the appropriation went as well. In summary, while these revenue streams are stable, the modest growth we are seeing is not sufficient to fully address rising costs and structural deficits in the highway funds. Factors such as fuel prices, economic conditions, and weather patterns will continue to play a significant role in shaping our revenue projections. Strategic planning and ongoing legislative support will be critical in ensuring sustainability of these funds and programs they support. We welcome your questions.
Representative Illury.
Thank you. On the plea by mail, in 20, when we transferred that over to the highway fund, the next estimate was a real guess because we had no idea how that would actually work out. And it seems as though the fees have been pretty much evenly between 5 and 6 each year on both counts. However, there seems to be a general decrease in the overall amount received in fees. And there is an increase, as you can tell, because you drove to work this morning, in speeding and in individual accidents, accidents with injuries, while deaths have continued to decline because of safer cars and newer cars, I would presume. The enforcement seems to decrease. Is this because of a lack of filled positions within the state police division, or can you have an idea as to why there hasn't been an increase when there's been an increase in speeding and other violations? I mean, we had that horrific one in Derry with the school bus violation. Is there anything like that you can add to that?
Yeah, I don't, it's definitely not a one-to-one. I wouldn't say that we're actively filling state police vacancies, but we do have a high vacancy rate. We're at 61 vacancies right now. However, we are filling academy classes at between 8 and 10 right now, which is really, really good. That's a really good ratio for us. So we are recruiting more, we're having more, our larger classes. But as far as writing tickets, it's not the only thing the state police does. So if we were to increase the police force by 10, we'd probably write more tickets. If we increase by 1, I don't know. So I think that they're doing the best that they can, and we're not fully staffed. So,
and just for the record, because some people, 1 or 2 possibly, are actually watching this, there is no quota system in the state police or any of the towns in which because the towns do not receive any of this money. And there's no mandatory minimum or places where people have to sit and do traffic enforcement. Is that correct?
That's
To the
correct.
best of your knowledge?
that's correct.
Yes, Representative Elberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. On slide 17, there's an indication here that the purple represents plumbers and gas fitters.
We haven't gone there.
So that is a service, that's the licensing service that moved from safety to OPLC. That's the licensing piece.
So the
So
follow
that
up.
is being recorded in revenue, but just not from safety.
Just
Follow.
so plumbers and gas fitters fees used to come Okay, thank you.
Representative Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Director. On page 12, again, I would be curious to see if you could provide us with a breakdown, a similar chart over time in terms of actually the aggregate numbers of people who are getting operators licenses, the real ID licenses, commercial, I'd be interested. I'm assuming that now when most people are getting their license renewed, they're getting real ID. But I'd be curious about that.
Thank you. I will follow up with the DMV as well.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to go over here first. Representative Breyer.
Yeah, I know you're not going to have this answer right now, but I was just curious because I haven't looked at it in a while. My understanding is New Hampshire is the lowest tax rate on fuel in the Northeast. We looked at New England or the Northeast, what are the neighboring states' rates, and is there how many cents are we lower than, say, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, all the neighboring states? Because if I recall, you're still taking about 830 million gallons taxable, right? Your taxable gallons is still about 830 million.
Yeah, we haven't seen a fluctuation in that number.
So you still bring in about 8.3 million for every penny, right? So I was just curious what we had for wiggle room between tax rates on neighboring states.
I do have that breakdown. I didn't bring it with me.
I didn't expect you
Yeah.
to have it. I was just wondering if there's a possibility to get with all our neighboring states, both diesel and gasoline.
Sure.
Representative Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned that you have 61 vacancies right now in your police force. Now, we heard, I guess, at least the town of Plymouth, that there was like a 28% or 26% vacancy rate. Is that still the case, or are we hiring now?
I don't have the percentage. That seems really high.
Yeah.
So I know in state police, we have 61 vacancies today.
Is it 51 or 61?
61.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if you drive by, follow up, sorry. If you drive by Hazen Drive, you'll see basically a lot of cars just parked there. And I'm not certain if that reflects why the number of vacancies are still there or something, or?
Some of the vehicles that you're seeing are some of the new vehicles that have come in that are ready for upfit and then deployment, because we have a lot of older vehicles that we are transitioning. And then some of the other vehicles that you're seeing are being prepped to go out for auction.
Representative Ulrich.
Lots of questions were raised here. When a vehicle from highway or from state police or from DES, do we have any record of how much money is made from that as an offset?
When a vehicle goes out to auction,
Yeah,
it would be with the Department of Administrative Services, yes.
okay. Okay, so that money is accounted for someplace.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, thank you. The
Follow-up?
Yeah, well, second question. If all right.
Yeah.
Regarding the license fees, your basic operator license costs $50. An endorsement for motorcycles only, I think, another $10 on top of that. An endorsement for a commercial license is then depending upon each endorsement, they pay a fee. So when you say commercial $60, that's 50 plus. It could be $70 or $80 if he's a Class A driver with a hazardous materials endorsement. Each endorsement has its own fee that's attached, so that's not exactly a set fee. Not every truck driver is paying $60 for his truck license. It depends on what he's hauling. The same thing applies for Real ID, because the Real ID can apply to a non-driver ID, so that you get $10 for the non-driver ID, which is basically the cost of the photograph. But then there's the cost of having to do the background check to get the real ID, which is separate from the endorsement that show, or the little star that shows up on the license. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. I want to confirm with DMV.
Yeah, and so this is a good generalization, but it doesn't provide a precise accounting for each value per license. For example, a Class B commercial license costs less than a Class A commercial license. And then you have school bus drivers, which have to have an operator's license in order to get a commercial license. So everybody's got to have the basic license, and that is duplicated in the commercial license, whether it's for the heavy trucks or for the light trucks. That's correct. So knowing each number, you're not going to get an accurate picture as to the number of drivers that are on the road. Is that correct?
I'm going to have to defer to the DMV and get back with you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Malloy.
Chair. Thank you. Thanks for taking my question. Apologize if this isn't the right organization. I'm curious to know, what is the lifespan of a cruiser? Years and what?
It's miles.
Miles?
So
Okay.
we, ideally, a replacement plan for a state police vehicle, we'd want to, we'd be looking at right around 150,000 miles.
Thank you.
And they're good buys at that.
Okay. Any other, are you finished or did you have another slide?
No, we're finished.
Okay. Any more questions?
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Is that part
We
of?
have one more.
Okay.
On the, in addition to your PowerPoint, there is a one pager for, and these are all the numbers put together that is on one page that are throughout your PowerPoint as well.
Thank you very much. We've got a few minutes. Our next presentation is Department of Transportation at 11 a.m. So take a few minutes. again with the Department of Transportation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name's David Rodriguez. I'm the Assistant Commissioner and Chief Engineer of the Department of Transportation. With me is Danielle Chandonnet. Danielle?
And I'm the Director of Finance.
Welcome.
So we've prepared a presentation for you that I'll go over rather quickly, and we'll be happy at the chair's pleasure to take questions at the end or as you like. From a financial perspective, this presentation more focuses on a very small amount of our funds, which is the unrestricted miscellaneous revenue that the department receives, but we're happy to answer any questions that you have on the revenue and how the department's funded. From a mission and purpose perspective, the Department of Transportation's mission is transportation excellence, enhancing the quality of life in New Hampshire. And we are very focused on providing a quality, well-maintained, efficient, and reliable transportation system for all our customers. That includes the people on the highways and the people on the buses, and we do have one commuter train as well. Some key facts about the department: we have about 1,650 permanent positions. We maintain about 2,159 state bridges. Not under our maintenance responsibility, but bridges we do look after and inspect are the municipal bridges. Across the state, there's 1,698 of those. All bridges are inspected every 2 years, and red list bridges, or bridges that are found to be structurally deficient that we have concerns about, those are inspected more frequently than every 2 years. Some more key facts: we have about 4,600 centerline miles of roadway that we manage. We try to pave about 500 miles of that pavement a year to keep that in good and fair condition. We maintain more than 100,000 highway signs, 68 million feet of striping, 440 traffic signals. Also 25 publicly accessible airports, and we send funds to 11 local public transit systems. From a funding summary perspective, our fiscal year 2024 actual expenditures were $702 million. We break that up in the pie chart below to show you of that $702 million, $396 million of it flows through us to municipalities for their road aid, and also goes to construction, capital construction projects that the larger contractors do on our roads around the state. We have several divisions in the department. We have the Division of Aeronautics, Rail, and Transit. We have a Bureau of Aeronautics, a Bureau of Rail, and Public Transit. The aeronautics folks have 25 open to the public airports, 12 of which are federally funded, and 12 of which do not receive federal aid. On the rail side, we have 6 active operator agreements. We have 194 miles of active state-owned rail lines and 333 miles of abandoned or inactive rail lines. And on the public transit side, we have 11 local public transit systems that run intercity and commuter services and provide community transportation. Some accomplishments include administration of the federal funding, departmental UAS, that's our drone implementation and integration, and establishment of relationships with other state agencies as it deals with unmanned aircraft or drones. We have our finance and administration divisions. The Division of Finance works with our budget formulation, our financial operations, contract management, oversees our federal program management financials. It takes care of our debt service and reporting and auditing. Our Division of Administration includes our Commissioner's Office and the Division of Policy and Administration, which has our HR folks and helps us with our workforce. And we've really been focused on recruitment and retention, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. Our Project Development Division is a division that plans, designs, and then oversees the construction of all of our projects statewide, all of our construction projects. They also take care of the right-of-way that's the land that the roadways, our roadways and transportation systems sit on. Some fiscal year 24 accomplishments include 57 new construction contracts. Overall, we provided oversights on 84 active projects for a total value of $750 million. We have our turnpike system. Our turnpike system is what we call an enterprise funded system. All of the money that's collected through the tolls on the turnpike system has to stay on the turnpike system. So we cannot take funds that are collected on toll roads and spend those funds on non-toll roads. So this graphic describes the turnpike system. We have 3 segments. I-95, we have the Spalding Turnpike, and we have the Central Turnpike system, or F.E. Everett Turnpike system that runs up from Nashua to Concord. We also want to point out that our turnpike funding has been relatively flat. There's a modest 1 to 2% increase as the years go by, but that is far from covering the inflation that we've seen in recent years. From a maintenance and operations perspective, we have the Division of Operations that includes the Bureaus of Highway Maintenance, Bridge Maintenance, Traffic, Mechanical Services that takes care of our fleet, Fuel Distribution that provides fuel for state agencies as well as municipalities and some nonprofits. And we have our Transportation Systems Management and Operations Bureau that takes care of what we call our intelligent transportation system and really helps to manage the traffic on the roadway on a day-to-day basis. We do our snow removal on days like today from our highway maintenance bureaus. We have 6 districts and about 87 patrol sheds around the state. 87 patrol sheds always sounds like a lot, but when you think about 230 plus towns in New Hampshire, it's 1 patrol shed for about every 3 towns. And the reason we're effective with our winter maintenance is because our sheds are located where they need to be, so we have a reasonable distance to travel to treat the roads and restock with salt and other materials. A little bit about the Highway Fund overview. So we're always careful to say the Highway Fund is not the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Transportation is not the Highway Fund. I think you heard from Safety before us, so I think you understand they collect those funds. What goes into the Highway Fund is the road toll, which is the gas tax, 22.2 cents per gallon. 13.2% goes into the unrestricted highway fund. 2.2 cents flows back to municipalities through block grant aid. 2.6 cents goes to the betterment, and 4.2 cents goes to SB 367, which was a TIFIA loan that the department received to advance the construction of I-93. And the way that TIFIA loan was structured, the department promised for the first part of that loan to put those funds towards, to put the 4.2 cents every year to the municipalities and to our state pavements and bridges. We were able to do that and pay interest only on the loan until fiscal year 25, which is the year we're in. As we go forward, that the proceeds from that 4.2 cents now needs to go to pay for the debt service of I-93 until that loan is paid off. So we've lost about $20 million a year there that we've been putting towards our state roads and bridges. The highway fund is DOT's primary source of funding our operations and maintenance on state road. So we receive quite a few federal funds, about $230+ million a year on the highway side, more on the aeronautics, rail, and transit side. Those federal funds come to us and have to be spent on very specific things. We cannot flex federal funds towards our maintenance and operations. They all have to go towards the construction and the care of the federal aid highway system. We do take advantage of those federal funds, though, to help our operating budget by leveraging that to help pay the salaries of some of our people, some of our engineers, some of our finance, a portion of our finance bureau and so forth, some of our construction folks. We leverage those federal funds to help us pay state employees' salary to reduce the burden on the highway fund that goes towards our operations and maintenance. It's also important to explain that most federal programs require a state match, and the state match for most of our federal funds is between 20 and 10%. In New Hampshire, we use what we call turnpike toll credits for that match because we don't have state funds or money in the highway fund for that match. The way turnpike toll credits work is we can take credit for the investment, the capital and R&R investment in our turnpike system towards the match of our federal aid program. So for instance, if we do a construction project, a capital project on the turnpike, it costs $200 million and other certain thresholds are met, we can count that as our match to our federal funds on other projects. That means that's a match that does not include cash. So we have to fully pay for the federal project with federal funds, but we're fortunate to have the toll credits to let us do that match. The next slide explains some of the recent history for the highway fund revenue. And then we get to the slide that I believe this committee was most interested in, the unrestricted miscellaneous revenue that the department receives. And the truth is the unrestricted revenue that we receive is very, very small in comparison. It's $200,000 to $1.2 million per year approximately over the last several years. We get these funds by the sale of surplus land. We get these funds by equipment that's worn out that we bring to the White Farm, old chainsaws, old things like that. We regulate some signs that are within our right-of-way. There's a small portion of funds that comes to us from the signs in our right-of-way. Also, we have a print shop that makes plans for other agencies. We get a little bit of funds there, and also from junkyard licensing. But at the end of the day, the unrestricted revenue we receive is very, very small. Some of the issues and challenges the department is facing includes inflation, increased labor and material costs on a lot of our construction projects. We've seen significant cost increases over the last several years particularly coming out of COVID. We're starting to see things stabilize just a little bit, but it's still increasing and it's not coming back down. Our other challenges include workforce vacancies. So our current vacancy rate department-wide is about 24%. That means 1 out of every 4 positions is vacant. That's really putting a strain on us trying to get our projects out for construction and so forth, paying the bills and hiring people and keeping up with our snow plowing and so forth. That also winds up impacting our productivity and forcing us to prioritize our resources to our critical areas. And for us, our critical areas are all about safety. So we make sure that we have what we call volunteers to help us plow snow during the winter. So we have other people in the department whose primary job is not to plow snow that have a CDL license, and we set up a program so that they can come help us plow snow for the winter, and we work to keep a person in every vehicle. We also have several state agencies that we appreciate very much that have employees with CDLs that come to work with us during the winter, during snowstorms and so forth, to plow snow as well. The next chart shows some information on our budgeted positions. So the top chart on the next page shows our budgeted positions. And what we want folks to understand is for a long time, and what we show here is from 2002 to present, we have a history of reducing positions. So this has nothing to do with vacancy rate. This top chart is permanent full-time positions, budgeted positions, and we've had a steady decline in the number of positions that we've had. We also show a graph. The line there is what we call vehicle miles traveled, which shows the mileage that vehicles travel throughout the state. And that shows a general increase while we've been decreasing our head count. And then finally, the chart on the bottom of that page shows our budgeted positions, our filled positions, and also shows you the vacancy rate trend line. And that green line is a vacancy rate trend line. And what you can see is prior to 2019 and 2020, we maintained a pretty consistent vacancy level. But during COVID, that vacancy level started to rise, and it's continued to rise, and just recently is leveling out. And it's important to us that that doesn't continue to rise beyond where we are, because we really are stretched thin. The Commissioner Cass explains it very well. We work hard to get done everything we have to get done, but there are a lot of things behind the scenes that we would like to be doing and that we think need to be done that are not getting done. That's the overall presentation that we've prepared for today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Representative Elmy.
Thank you. I have two, actually, totally different from each other. One of them is, I think the brine innovation came in about 8 years ago, something like that. We're now brining the roads in winter. As a result, we're getting people going 75 miles an hour or more on the main roads. But it is an incredible contribution, not only to safety, but I should imagine to your budget to be doing the brining rather than plowing real snow.
So if I could, I'll take a minute to explain our brining program. So our brining program is a pre-treatment that we will do in some very limited areas of the state to the roadways before the snow comes. There are very special very special weather conditions that we need to have to make brining available or make brining beneficial to our winter maintenance activities. So there are some sections of 93 from Salem to Manchester, some secondary roads in that area that we have to brine on to meet our environmental conditions for the expansion of 93. And we meet all of those areas. We've expanded our brining program to include I-95, the Spalding Turnpike, and I-93 north to Concord, and the FE Everett. But we do not brine statewide. There are a couple other locations around the state that we also apply brine. So what we do is go out before the snowstorm, when the weather conditions are right, we spray the brine on the road, and that brine will keep the snow that initially falls from bonding to the pavement and help us to plow it off without pack creating or without that bond creating. We still use salt, granular salt for most of our roads and during the storm and for storm cleanup.
Follow up?
I live on the end of 89, and I haven't seen any sign of salt going down. I have seen clean roads right after every snowfall. So I don't quite understand what's going on with that. But I did have another question. Back when Governor Lynch came in to office and discovered that the Department of Transportation was had not been applying inflation factors to the 10-year plan for so long that it was an 18-year plan, and brought in someone who fixed that. Is it still fixed?
It is still fixed. So the last 10-year plan had a 3.2% inflation rate for the plan. We're getting ready to update the plan again, and we will update that inflation rate. What's important for me to explain, though, that goes along to this, is we have two things that impact the cost of our construction projects. One is escalation, one is inflation. So we can apply inflation factors to projects over the next 10 years. What we can't do and what inflation doesn't do is take into account all of the anomalies that we've seen in cost. And we all know it's a different world since COVID. Material cost, labor cost, many costs have far exceeded inflation and what the inflation rate is, even at that high 3.2% level that we carried in the last 10-year plan.
Yeah.
I was attempting to figure out how much it was going to cost to do the internal roads inside my homeowners complex. And there is a series on the National Transportation Agency website that tells you, that follows those costs specifically.
Yes.
And which made me very unhappy, but you can't use that in your inflationary estimates?
We do. And Danielle can tell you more about what goes into our inflation calculation, but we use both the National Construction Cost Index and our own construction cost index, where we look back at historical prices. But again, those are based on looking back, and there are often anomalies in the economy that impact things. Danielle, do you want to add anything?
if you're interested in that, we can certainly provide you with the way that we calculate that information.
Representative Elberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for taking my question. This is just general information. You mentioned that there are airports that receive federal aid and some that don't. Could you just explain why some do and some don't?
I'm sorry, I cannot explain that in great detail. Some are commercial federal aid eligible airports and some are smaller private airports. What I can do is get you a listing of both the airports that do take federal funds and the private airports that are not eligible for federal funds.
Follow up?
Follow up?
So it sounds like, sort of in general terms, larger airports are more likely to receive federal aids than the really little ones.
Larger ones and airports that are open to the public. So Lebanon, for instance, that airport's open to the public, that gets federal funding. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Schamberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Rodriguez. In what area does the state need to address the benefit system to keep more employees? Is there a deficit in what you can offer and what the private industry is offering?
Yeah, so when we talk about attracting employees, the state has a great benefits program from my perspective. Where we tend to fall behind is in the hourly wage. And where we also fall behind a little bit today, we still have wonderful retirement system, but people starting today need to stay with the state a very long time before they can benefit from that retirement system. So you really have to have the long view. From my perspective, it's not a benefits issue with our recruitment and retention. It's a dollars per hour issue, and we all know about the housing cost in New Hampshire and so forth, and you have to be able to afford to live where you're working.
Representative Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for taking my question. I'm curious, and I'm going someplace I probably shouldn't, but in terms of our airports, beyond the federal funding that the state may receive, and beyond, say, meals and rooms tax revenue that comes in from the airports for rental cars and whatever meals flyers are enjoying, and beyond the positive economic impact of, say, Manchester Airport, are there any other direct revenue coming from those airports, particularly the larger ones or maybe all of them? I don't know. Any direct revenue that comes to the state, either restricted or unrestricted.
Right. So from the airports, not that I'm aware of, there are some airplane registrations that our Division of Aeronautics collects a very small amount on. So I'll ask Danielle to correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of revenue that comes in. And there's also not much for state resources that we put towards airports. The funds that we have that go towards airports that I'm aware of are federal pass-through funds without much, if any, state match.
Yes, that is true. It's mostly pass-through funds for airports and the air fees that the commissioner spoke about. And those fees are used to help subsidize some of the airports that don't qualify for federal funds. And there isn't a lot of that. I would say $250,000, 250,000.
Sure. A follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Follow-up?
And I'm just curious about what DOT, what your involvement is with the public transit on that side. Is it mostly regulatory? What is your role?
So similar to the airports, there's a lot of pass-through funding. So we're managing the pass-through funds from the feds is the primary role
To support public transit.
to support public transit. Yes.
Thank you.
Representative Ors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. So, you had mentioned the CDL drivers that are volunteering to plow. I mean, are they on the payroll somewhere else? And
So yes, they are on the payroll somewhere else, and out of our winter maintenance budget, we pay for their overtime that they would spend with us plowing snow. There is also an incentive payment that they receive, $5,000 a winter, which is what has allowed us to have a very robust list of those volunteers, people who are willing to do that. They have to be available 24/7 and come in whenever they're called. But as long as they do that, they receive that incentive. And thanks, we have about 140 volunteers this winter. We call them volunteers. Of course, they're paid and they receive the incentive. But 140 people who are willing to help us out that way. That's how we ensure we have a seat in every truck with 180 to 190 vacancies and highway maintainers. It's great to have those people. We would prefer to have the people who work with us year round and receive the training, really get to know their roads real well and so forth. But it works for us.
follow up?
Follow up?
So, additional, did you say earlier that we have drones? We have a drone program in development, or?
We do. We have several drones in the department, and those are very helpful for us from an emergency response perspective. So we can go out. One of the things we do quite well with our workforce at the department is responding in times of emergencies. But there's a big need to categorize the damage and document the damage that's occurred so we can get FEMA reimbursement, so we can estimate quantities of materials that we need and so forth. And the unmanned aircraft are very helpful for us in doing that. They have great applications for our construction projects to help our contractors show people what's going on the project as well. They also have LiDAR capabilities so that we can get some detailed survey information from them and so forth. And we continue to look at ways that they can help enhance our operations.
Very good, thank you.
Representative Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Getting back to Representative Obel's question about whether or not you expend monies for transportation. And I just want to admit that I'm an executive director of a transportation company in Plymouth, and it's all volunteer drivers. And we receive what's called DOT 5310 funds that actually pays for trips and reimburses not our drivers per se, but we pay them the IRS evaluation for basically to keep them whole. You know, they're not getting any revenue from it, but they're getting now 70 cents a mile, which is actually quite good. But I guess my question is, I'm also trying to start an actual transportation route in the town of Plymouth. And it just seems so cumbersome to go through the process of getting permissions. And I'm wondering if you might streamline my request to get a bus going through Plymouth. Thank you.
You're welcome. We will. I will get your information after the hearing, Representative.
Representative Breyer.
Yeah, I just had one question. I'm trying to remember, how much money does the Road Toll Bureau at Safety collect with regards to jet fuel and airway tolls?
That I don't have that number. We can get that for you.
Okay, follow up. Does that still go directly to the aeronautics division? Like, was my understanding that was to help fund some of the programs over there?
I'm not sure. It's not a question. It's not something I've been asked. I can do the research for you
Thank you.
and figure it out.
Representative Hillary.
Thank you. I found it rather interesting that you were taking people from one department and applying. That entails, it seemed to me, a large amount of bookkeeping, both on the part of the driver and of the agencies, in order to maintain the person's ability to do his primary job as well as his secondary job. That, because of the hour limitation for commercial operators, even though these guys are not normally engaged in interstate operation, they're engaged in operation on interstates, so they get the hour restrictions, which are killing people, or killing productivity. I'll put it that way, not people, productivity. How much does it cost highway to do all that extra bookkeeping to make sure that you don't kill off the primary job and you still have somebody on the secondary job?
Well, I can talk about the payroll implications. So that there is a payroll implication for that. So we have the staffing there. There is some overtime charge to that. There is some coordination with administrative services to make sure that those things occur. It definitely is more work in the wintertime, but it gets accomplished. As far as the productivity of employees, I can't speak to that directly. I would ask if you have some.
Yeah, thank you. And we agree with you. Not an ideal situation. The people who do this are first willing. Nobody's compelled to do it. And they do get approval through their supervisory chain of command. A lot of these people's full-time job is not necessarily driving a commercial vehicle. They have other jobs. Some of them work for the Dam Bureau at DES. So part of their job may be to operate a commercial vehicle. But a lot of them, that's most of all of them, that's not what they're doing all day, every day.
Follow up?
Yeah, the only reason I in a previous life, I did liability investigations and fraud investigations and such, and that came across with a OTR and was doing a favor for a friend, and he almost got badly screwed because he was over hours because of the friend, and unfortunately I was when some idiot hit him head on at speed. So it's the only reason I asked that. I want to make sure the state didn't have any liability. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we're running late. Let's take one more question from Representative
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Malloy.
Very quickly, I want to refer to the page. You have highway fund revenue history. And this is before my time, but in 2010 and it looks like 11, there's a line in there that says $30 reg surcharge of 38 and then 29, and it disappears in 2012. What was that?
Yes, so there has been a long-term recognition and concern that the highway fund does not generate enough revenue to do everything that the Department of Safety and the Department of Transportation need to do. So there have been a number of what we call one-time fixes. That $30 registration surcharge was a temporary surcharge. It was a one-time fix. If my memory serves me correctly, most of that surcharge went to paving our what we call tier 3, tier 4 roads, lower volume roads that were not in very good shape at all at the time. But that's an example of a one-time fix that was used to get us through a few years for a specific purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for today's testimony. Yes.
It's one quick, I just want to get it on the record that in fiscal year 26 and 27, the department believes the miscellaneous revenue that they'll collect will be $200,000 each year.
Yes, it's very difficult. It is very difficult to determine how much land will be sold, what it will be sold for, et cetera. And so we keep that at a base
And
of
that's,
200,000.
that's in line with your low
Yes.
number.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Should probably make note of that. We'll now welcome up the Health and Human Services Department.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, Meredith's gonna start. Meredith.
Did you see that? I sent you an email. Oh, that. Yes, welcome. And if you'd introduce yourselves.
Of course. Good morning, members of the committee. Mr. Chair, my name is Nathan White. I'm the Chief Financial Officer with the Department of Health and Human Services. And joining me here today is also...
I'm Attorney Janelle Leleji, and I'm General Counsel for and Manager of the Department's Medicaid Estate Recovery Unit.
Good morning. Good morning, yes. I'm Meredith Tellus, Director of our Division of Program Quality and Integrity for the department.
Okay, so before you, you have a presentation, and if you turn to page 2, that is where we'll begin. So the Department of Health and Human Services, we have a number of different sources of recoveries and other revenues. And I think what's important to understand here, and Janelle and Meredith are going to be going into some of the details, and you've probably heard this from some of the other state agencies, is it is very difficult to predict the amount of recoveries that the state will have, because some of this is dependent upon probate actions, some of it is dependent upon prosecutions by the Attorney General's office. It is dependent upon Medicaid cost reports, how costs have been reported by various organizations, as well as whether individuals that were previously in the Medicaid program has passed. And so there's a lot of externalities that control these. And so what we can see from year to year is significant fluctuations. So in state fiscal year 24, which is not listed here, we collected approximately $3.5 million of other revenue within recoveries. This year, based on current projections, and we look at this on a monthly basis, we're looking at about $2.162 million. However, one settlement or one recovery could quickly throw that off, because sometimes those come in the amounts of several $100,000. But based on current projections, that is where we're looking. For state fiscal year 26 and 27, you'll see that we have budgeted about $3.1 million. That's slightly higher than the current budget. But when we prepared the agency's budget request back in August, we are given specific instructions, and one of those instructions was to keep those revenues as budgeted for the current biennium. So that's part of the reason why you're seeing 3.12 million there, even though the projected for this year is lower. So that's a very high level of the overview of the different types of recoveries and sort of some of the challenges that we do have in projecting some of these. Obviously, it's about $3 million. It's not a huge amount of money when looking at the many other revenue sources that this committee evaluates on a regular basis. And we're going to start off with the Medicaid estate recovery, just going into a little bit more detail there, because that typically represents the bulk of our recoveries. And again, some years, if you don't have a lot of Medicaid estate recovery, you can see a significant drop. Whereas other years, you can, with one recovery alone, could be a couple $100,000, and it could change that pretty quickly. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Janelle.
Hi, good morning. As I said before, my name is Janelle Lelegia, and I run the Medicaid Estate Recovery Unit for the department. I'm also that unit's general counsel. It's a very small unit. It's myself as the only attorney, and then I have 4 staff members who support the work that we do. On any given year, we recover approximately at any given time, we have about 2,000 open cases, and that tends to be the total number of recoveries we get per year. The average recovery right now, the 17-year average recovery is just a little over $4,000 at a time. Recoveries can be anywhere from, I'm not kidding you, 2 cents to over $1 million. So it's we're quite busy, and every little bit counts. So we try to go after every type of recovery that we are permitted to by law. We have actually 16 different categories of recovery. The 2 biggest are from probate estates, from deceased Medicaid recipients. Then we also recover from certain special needs trusts. And then the other big one is from liens, on which the recovery from liens on property that's sold, that we place during a recipient's lifetime, and it either sold while they were alive or after. We're very, very careful about following the law with respect to liens and estate recovery. We do not recover under a number of circumstances depending on the type of recovery. As you know, Medicaid is a welfare system, and we are obligated, and have been since the inception of Medicaid in the early 1960s, to recover under certain circumstances. Then state law has also then built around that. And in fact, the federal law, I just like to point out, because a lot of folks don't know it, and I think it's important because it speaks to New Hampshire's history and tradition. The federal estate recovery law was actually based on what New Hampshire has been doing since the 1930s. So when I first started with the unit, our average total recovery was about 4.6 million, and we are up to 6.7 million now, but we're at about max capacity at this point. So
just clarify, we don't collect all those dollars.
And yes, that we recover on behalf of the federal government and the counties as well as the state. So a good chunk of what we recover actually goes to the federal government, and another big chunk of what's left after that goes to the counties for long-term care services primarily. So I don't know, do you want me to go into some more? Or so the numbers that you see on page 2 with respect to Medicaid estate recovery, projected for this year will be about $1.5 million. And as Mr. White indicated just a moment ago, the 26 and 27 numbers, we were instructed to keep those fixed. I don't know if anyone has any questions, or I know you're short on time, so I try to keep this brief. Or
I think we can continue. Thank you.
okay.
Great. Do you want me to walk them through child support? Okay. So starting on page 4, child support recoveries, you'll see are estimated at 11,000, budgeted in the next 2 years at 15,000. These are court-ordered recoveries of medical support where Medicaid's made a payment. On the next slide, slide 5, cost settlements, or you can walk through this all on slide 2 as well, whichever you prefer. The individual slides have descriptions underneath the numbers, so however you prefer to walk through it. These are cost settlement recoveries. So this is where the Medicaid program, on just the fee for service individuals in the Medicaid program. So let me make a clarification that will apply to I think, almost all of the next few slides. The recoveries that we're making as an agency are only for our fee-for-service population. Our managed care organizations hold the bulk of the Medicaid population, over 180,000 people. And I think that in fee-for-service right now we have 10,000 people, fewer than 10,000 people on any given day. So we have a tiny portion of the Medicaid population. And these recoveries are only based on those 10,000, which is why the numbers that you see are so small. The managed care organizations do the recoveries on their side for their population. So I just want to make that clarification for you. So the cost settlements here are for outpatient claims. Based on our methodology, we pay an interim outpatient payment, and then those are audited by Myers and Stauffer, and then we settle up with the hospitals at a later date. Slide 6, other recoveries, diabetic supply. These are reimbursements that we get based on rebates that we have established with diabetic supply entities. Slide 7, other recoveries. This is simply an individual account, I'll call it, or accounting of prior year related recoveries. And that's just so that from a financial perspective, we have tabs on what's happening in the current year versus prior years. Slide 8, the Attorney General's Office fraud unit. This is the Medicaid fraud control unit at the Attorney General's Office that prosecutes fraud for us as related to Medicaid providers. You'll see that our current projection for this year is around $75,000. The next 2 years, we've only budgeted $40,000. As Nathan mentioned early, this is very case specific. It absolutely depends on how many cases they have, how much each case is worth, and how long it takes to prosecute them. Slide 9, the Medicaid Program Integrity Unit, projections by state fiscal year. Projection for this year is at $100,000, and we're budgeted for $150,000 in each of the next 2 years. These are cases that don't rise to the level of fraud, but there's some kind of overpayment that we identify in our population, and we will do our own investigations. And when we determine that it's not fraud, we will recover the money ourselves. So that's why this is separated out from the work of the AG's unit. Slide 10. Client recoveries. So the other slides were related to Medicaid providers where we believe there's been an overpayment. Slide 10 is related to where there's an individual beneficiary where we think there's been an overpayment. And when the recovery's been determined through some kind of court prosecution or a settlement with county attorneys, then we will receive payments. These are usually done in the form of a payment plan. Current projections for this year are at $27,000, and we've budgeted $40,000 in each of the next 2 years. Again, I'll just reiterate, this is all very case specific. So it's really up to what happens in a year, how much activity there is, and how much it's valued at. Slide 11. This is related to individuals in our fee-for-service program who are on Medicaid but also have some other form of insurance. They could have commercial insurance, they could have Medicare, and Medicaid has to be the payer of last resort. So in instances where Medicaid somehow paid first, we would recover the money that should have been paid by another insurer, either directly from the other insurer, or in the case of Medicare, we recover it from the provider. And those are, the current projections are at $35,000, budgeted at just $6,000 for the next 2 years. As you'll note, there's a note here, it's elevated this year because we were doing some back billing from prior years, but that's not going to continue. And the last individual item is third-party liability casualty, so accident and trauma cases. You'll see that the current year is $180,000. The next 2 years are only $90,000. This is partly because, and I'm just looking at Tasha Blanchard, my bureau administrator for program integrity, to make sure I'm saying this correctly. But this is partly because we moved our TPL casualty program into the MCOs a couple of years ago. So what's happening now is as cases are settling out, we will get fewer and fewer recoveries on the state side. Yes. And the managed care entities will be getting the recoveries for, they're doing the work for us and they'll be keeping the recoveries for us. That money the state then gets on the back end when we do our rate setting for the managed care entities. We lower the amount that they're getting by the amount of these recoveries. So, and they're then doing the administrative work of pursuing the cases. And that's the end of our presentation. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Your timing is impeccable. It's 12 o'clock. But
Lunch.
we will see whether there's any questions. Representative Bolton.
Thank you,
Malloy.
Mr. Chair. I want to make sure I heard this right. You say that you deal with about 10,000 cases?
There are fewer than 10,000 people in the Medicaid fee-for-service program,
Okay.
meaning they're not covered by our managed care organizations.
Follow up?
Follow up?
How many were in the managed care
I
situation?
think we're around 183,000 right now.
Thank you.
Representative Elmy.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank you for the clearest presentation on this I've heard yet.
It's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear it.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have for this morning. So we will reconvene at 1 p.m. and at that time hear from the Department of Justice. Thank you. morning. We'll get started again here, and we will hear from the Department of Justice. Your button's not there.
Good afternoon. My name is Warren Cormack. I'm the Assistant Attorney General at the New Hampshire Department of Justice, who handles the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, the MSA. New Hampshire has received an MSA payment each year since 1999, the year after the agreement was signed. This agreement came as the result of a settlement between the states and the major cigarette companies. The states brought claims against the major cigarette companies, many of which related to the company's false claims about the dangers of cigarettes. As a result of the settlement, the major cigarette producers pay the states every year, and other companies that manufacture cigarettes are also required to put certain funds into escrow accounts. To receive a full payment under the MSA, the states must diligently enforce the MSA and its associated statutes. So that's my job. Since the inception of the MSA payment amounts to New Hampshire are regularly in the tens of millions of dollars annually. And that payment typically occurs in April, and in recent years, it's come in the form of two separate payments. To calculate the payment, we start with a large base value, and then that value is adjusted upwards and downwards several times before being allocated to the individual signatory states. Though it's not the only factor, a major factor which helps us estimate this payment is the total amount of cigarette sales nationwide. When I've previously testified before the Ways and Means Committee, I've been asked to answer the following questions. One, what are the contributing factors that go towards the annual MSA payment? Two, what are my estimates for how much New Hampshire will receive in MSA payments for the next 3 years? And three, how certain are my estimates? And is it possible to increase the certainty of those estimates? So first I'll start with what are the contributing factors that go towards the annual MSA payment? We start with a base payment, that's around $9 billion. It goes up for inflation, so that's 3% inflation every year assumed. If inflation is greater than 3%, then it goes up for that greater amount. It goes down for a volume adjustment, and that volume adjustment is the volume of cigarettes sold nationwide. And there can be reductions in the downwards volume adjustment, which means the volume adjustment can then go up a little bit, but still be downwards, due to increased operating income for the major manufacturers. There's also a downwards adjustment for the states that are not signatories to this agreement, so that reduces the amount that the states that are signatories to the agreement receive. And then there's a potentially downwards adjustment for something called the NPM adjustment. NPM stands for non-participating manufacturer. This is sales of cigarettes that are outside of this MSA payment structure, MSA agreement. They're non-signatories to the MSA agreement. And then after we do all that, we allocate New Hampshire. New Hampshire's allocated amount, and that percentage stays the same every year. It's about 0.65% of the total payment. And many assumptions go into these factors. I'd be happy to discuss those in the question period if you all are interested, but it's a complicated formula, and it relies on many variables. And at the end of it, I can come up with an estimated amount, but I always give the caution that the amounts that I put in any of these memos are reliant on a large number of factors, most of which are incredibly difficult to estimate. And even if we estimate them perfectly, the cigarette manufacturers may decide just to withhold certain portions of these funds because they have a right to do so under the MSA agreement. So these estimates are rough estimates at best. What are my estimates for how much New Hampshire will receive for the next 3 years? Well, 2025, I estimate around 35,500,000. 2026, 32,500,000, and in 2027, 30 million. So those estimates, they're around 35.5 million, 32.5 million, and 30 million are rough estimates at best. And as I said before, these are very uncertain. A major factor here is that the signatories to the agreement do have a right to withhold certain portions of that agreement, of the total sum to be paid. Sometimes a company will go out of business or cease to be able to transact with the United States. And in those cases, we won't receive the funds. And there's also the NPM adjustment, which is an adjustment that could also reduce our payment by a large amount. But we have, the state of New Hampshire has settled that dispute for the prior several years, which results in receiving the majority of that payment in the year subsequent to that payment. So I can talk more about that if you have questions about that, but that's generally how the NPM adjustment works, is that there's a slight downwards adjustment to the total payment. We've settled it, which makes it a lot more secure, and that's something that we've done for the last several years. There's the risk that if we go into an arbitration, it could be reduced. And if that were to occur, we could lose the entirety of the adjustment, or the entirety of the payment, but that has not happened to New Hampshire. So very uncertain, but those are my estimates. Happy to answer any questions.
Representative Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for that. I'm curious. You mentioned, I think, two situations in which a company could withhold funds from the agreement. One is they go out of business. Kind of makes sense. The other is, I think you said, if they're not able to do business in the U.S. I'm not sure what circumstances that would be, but are there other situations in which payments can be withheld?
Yes. A company who's signatory to the agreement can choose to redirect a certain portion of the funds away from the payment to a disputed payments account, or even withhold it from the disputed payments account. There's certain incentives not to do that, depending on how likely they think they're going to be successful in an arbitration based on this withholding. But they can do it for any number of reasons. It's certainly not limited to bankruptcy or being unable to transact with the United States. Typically, they would state a basis for the withholding of the funds under the MSA contract settlement, and then that would be taken into consideration by a future body potentially. But they can withhold. Excuse me, sorry about that. They could withhold based on a dispute that they have. They just have to claim it.
And a follow-up, Mr. Chairman. The other area that you mentioned was the potential in going to arbitration for a bad result. Does New Hampshire control its own fate, or are we dependent on all of the other signatories not going that route?
New Hampshire and several other states, many other states, have settled much of the arbitration issue. That is a continuing settlement, and this is called the NPM Adjustment Settlement Agreement. And we're settled through this upcoming payment year, so the April 2025 payment. And New Hampshire has successfully settled for this NPM adjustment for several years. But in order for New Hampshire to be settled through 2026, there would have to be an additional settlement.
Thank you.
Representative Elberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. The amounts that you're estimating, and I fully appreciate that they are estimates and that you're not committing in anything, they drop by about 2.5 million from year to year. Is that something that you're seeing as an ongoing trend? Is it specifically related to these years? But can you talk some more about that, please?
I can talk about that. So I think that the first of all, yes, it's a trend that we're seeing, and this is a pretty consistent trend through much of recent history, with the exception of kind of I can colloquially refer to as the COVID years. There was a bit of a boom in cigarette sales during that period, or at least less of a decline. And as I said, kind of at the start, much of the adjustment, much of the ways that that original base payment is adjusted is dependent on the volume of cigarette sales nationwide, and there are consistent declines in those volumes year over year, and that's largely what's accountable to the decrease year over year.
Thank you.
Anybody, Representative Almy?
Thank you. Do you have any data on what percentage of the cigarette market in the United States is controlled by the groups that are in the settlement as versus out?
That is a good question, and I did not come with that data today. I will say that the NPM market, my understanding is that it has increased, but to get the exact numbers on that, I would have to go back to my notes.
Could you give it to us later?
I could provide it to Charles, perhaps, is the best way.
Anybody else? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was, yes, that was short and sweet. So we have about 12 minutes now until our final presentation. Did not leave. The calendar advertised this as 1 o'clock only, having Department of Justice and Liquor Commission. So technically, I don't have to wait till 1:30. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes, though. I know a couple people just went out, but we'll start in about 2 minutes. All right, I think we can get started. And please introduce yourselves and we'll get going.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Joseph Malika. I'm the chairman of the New Hampshire Liquor Commission, and with me is Tina Demirs, our CFO. Mr.
Can
Chairman.
you,
members-
excuse me, can you pull that closer
Sure.
to you? We can't
A
really.
little closer, okay?
Yeah.
How's that, better?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So we'll start out our deck. On page 2, you see the 17 controlled jurisdictions in the United States, and you'll see there's some dots in some of the states which are control counties, which are in those states of Alaska, Maryland, Minnesota, and South Dakota. On page 3, you'll look at the 3-tier system, been in place since Prohibition, manufacturing, wholesale, broker, and retail. On page 4, the value of the 3-tier system. The real value of the 3-tier system in the United States is product tracking. Something you don't hear about much in the United States, and particularly in the controlled jurisdictions, is tainted alcohol or methanol-contained alcohol. But worldwide in 2024, 1,200 people were affected by tainted or counterfeit products, and 400 people died. And in the last 5 years, about 1,200 people have been affected and 4,500 people have died worldwide. So one of the most important things of the control system is just that. We track the product, we treat the product with respect, and we put it in the locations. Those outlet locations are controlled locations. On page 5, you'll see the competition. Our main competitor is Total Wine in Massachusetts. The history since 2011, when Governor Patrick increased the number of liquor store licenses that could be owned in Massachusetts. There was 3 licenses for years, and then it lifted the cap from 5 to 7, 7 to 9, and now it's up to 12. So Total Wine, 277 stores in 29 states with 11,000 employees, $6 billion in revenue, and last year they surpassed Costco as the top wine retailer in the country. Since then, they've opened 12 stores in New England, 4 in Connecticut, and 8 in Massachusetts. Direct competition to the Liquor Commission in large scale, something that the Liquor Commission hadn't experienced prior to that because of the 3 license cap in Massachusetts. So on page 6, you'll see some national and global factors impacting beverage alcohol sales. The biggest thing is we've had an increase in alcohol sales in the United States for the last 30 years until 2023, when across the board we experienced a 2% decline nationwide. That revenue is from SipSource, and in 23, 24, and 25, they're expecting a 5.9% decline in alcohol sales across the United States. These are national and global trends. There is some bright spots, but they're the areas where the growth is so small that it's really not affecting sales nationally. So on page 7, you'll see some of the factors impacting beverage alcohol sales. As I've said, dry January, sober October, 2 big things. Second bullet is for the first time, more Americans are using marijuana on a daily basis than alcohol. Last year, it was 33% of the people in the United States over 21. This year, it's up to 44%. So anti-alcohol organizations have formed, neo-prohibitionists as they're calling them, and in 2023, the World Health Organization put out a statement that no level of alcohol consumption is safe. As far as the tariffs are concerned, there's some positive and some negatives. Obviously, we feel that, some of the California wines and products that are made in the South will benefit, and there's a possibility that some of the products that come from overseas it'll be a deterrent. And again, those are national and global trends. On page 8, the impact of cannabis. You really can't have a candid dialogue about alcohol without bringing cannabis into play. And the Liquor Commission is not for or against cannabis, but we have to put these bullet points out just so everyone understands what's happening nationally in the United States as well as here in New England. You can see in Massachusetts, they have 355 licensed retailers. They're going to do they did 1.64 billion in 24. And the excise tax, or the tax that they recognized from that, was 272 million. You can see Maine's licenses, 217 million in sales, up 36% from 22. And they generated about $21 million in tax revenue. And in Vermont, second year in, 130 million, and they've actually had to pause taking applications for licensees because of the rapid growth. So these are the retailers, and this is the revenue that they bring in. On page 9, just a quick introduction to the commission. The commission is self-funded. It's a separate fund outside of the general fund, and we use no general fund appropriations are used to maintain the Liquor Commission. In 2024, we did $744 million in sales. In the breakdown of our stores, the amount transferred to the general fund is net of the administrative costs and transfers to the Alcohol Abuse and Prevention Fund and the Treatment Fund, Granted Advantage Healthcare. And we are governed under RSA 176:3. On page 10, just a quick outline of the organizational structure. We have 1,010 employees, full-time and part-time, 371 full-time employees, 237 of which are in our outlets, 640 part-time employees. A breakdown of the Office of the Commission, the Division of Enforcement, the Division of Administration, and the Division of Marketing and Merchandising. On page 11, you'll see some basic responsibilities for those 4 divisions. I won't go through it, but it's there and what those divisions each are responsible for. On page 12, a Next Gen summary project. Our Next Gen is our D365 Microsoft cloud-based system, which took over our Mapper system at the Liquor Commission, which was over 40 years old. It's a costly endeavor, but many benefits will be seen and are already seen, and efficiencies, especially in the years to come as we get through the nuts and bolts of that system. We had just launched it in April of last year, so we're not even a full year into it at this point. On page 13, retail outlet locations, we have 9 state-owned outlets, and the square footage, 141.8, 59 leased outlets, 153,000. 37 of those outlets have curbside service, which is folks can order their product online and pick it up at the curb or pick it up in the store. And the next thing that we'll go into, as our system allows us, will be home delivery. We have the state-owned outlets listed below, the 9 state-owned outlets that are listed below on the bottom of page 13. On page 14, you'll see that the top 15 outlets garner 49% of the revenue, and the other outlets are 51% of the revenue. You can see them listed here, 1 to 15, and the outlets with the asterisk are our state-owned locations, and they produce $142 million, almost $143 million in revenue. On page 15, you'll see since 2012, we've renovated, relocated, and constructed 44 new outlets in 35 communities. Some of the recent ones we've done are Derry, Keene, and Nashua. What we're working on now is our Interstate 95 north and southbound RFP project. That's a whole revitalization of those programs, and we're working with our consultants and attorneys on the purchase and sale and a master development agreement, so we can bring that to Governor and Council very soon. On page 16, the goal of the Liquor Commission is to bring the best products and values to our customers through a positive shopping experience. Bottom line, clean stores, safe stores, well-stocked with competitive prices. On page 17, some of our e-commerce work. We get over 125,000 visitors a month to our website. Our curbside has brought in 3.2 million in 24. It was up 2.1% increase. And we've done 12.2 million year to date since the inception of the curbside in 2020. And those three outlets, Salem, West Lebanon, and Northampton, are the top three outlets for our website e-commerce. On page 18, just some quick stats. Instagram, over 10,000 followers. Facebook, over 162,000 followers. And on X, formerly Twitter, 7,300 plus followers. We send out 7 targeted emails a month to our consumers. We try not to inundate them, but we try to let them know what we have on sale and the values that they'll find in our stores. On page 19 are our Google reviews. 92% of our Google reviews are 4s and 5s. So that's very positive for what we do. And Tina will take you through the history of the revenue sources. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On page 20, you'll see the breakdown of our revenue sources. We have beer tax and permits. This is the 30 cents for each gallon of beverage sold or transferred for retail sales. Then there's the liquor and wine revenue, which is, and also includes accessories, and these are through our outlet locations for the retail customers, on-premise licensees, which is the restaurants and lounge, and off-premise licensees is grocery stores and markets. And then the other revenue is for licensing fees, and direct shipping licensing is about 3.6 million, and direct shipping is about 1.2 million of that other revenue. On page 21, this is the net liquor and wine sales to profit. We wanted to show that gross profit is consistent over the last 10 years at 28 and 29%. And on the bottom chart, you'll see that net profit from 15 to 23 was between 19 and 22%. And there is a decline in FY24. It's at 17%. And this is due to the 10% pay raise and rate change, which equated for about 9.5 million between the full-time salaries and benefits increase and then the rate changes for our part-timers in our stores to try and increase the rates to be more competitive with the other markets. And then the expenses associated with our new software system, it's about an increase of about $5 million. And then you can see that total net profit from 1935 to 2024 was 1.6 billion. On page 22, the 24 sales by customer type and category, just to show you where our sales come from. You have the retail sales that are 71.5% of our business. Spirits is 49% and wine is 22%. And then the breakdown for the other categories with on-premise being 12.4% and off-premise 15.6%, and the accessories are 0.5%. Approximately 50% of sales in our outlets are from out of state, 25% from Massachusetts, 10% from Maine, 8% from Vermont, and 2% from Canada, and 5% from other states. And then the pie charts are broken down by FY24 spirit sales by type. You'll see that the spirit sales retail is 378 million or 84%. And then the wine sales is 169, almost 170 million or 54%. On page 23, this you'll see the peak in revenue on the first chart during COVID, and then the decline that has followed in the years after. And as mentioned, the 24 net profit has decreased because of those expense items. We do have 2 RSAs that govern our transfers prior to the transfer to the general fund. The first one is RSA 176. 15, and that's the Alcohol Abuse and Prevention and Treatment Fund. That's 5% of our prior year gross profit, and this transfer started in FY 16 at 1.7%, and today it's 5%. And then there's RSA 126AA:3. This is the Granted Advantage Healthcare Program. This number is determined by HHS for projected or to provide sufficient non-federal funding with the ability for them to ask for additional funding if they don't have that off match. And then you have beer tax, which has been consistent around 13 million, but has also declined slightly in FY24. So on page 24, this is a summarized income statement that shows the FY24 actual and our 25, 26, and 27 projections. So you start with gross profit from sales plus the other revenue minus the expenses to come to the net revenue on row 4, which is in the green. And you'll see it's been pretty consistent. FY26 and 27 are projected to be 126.2 million. And then in the blue, you have the transfers to HHS. And then that brings you to the total revenue transfer to the general fund, which was in FY24, 109.6 million. And we're projecting in 26 and 27, a little over 102, almost 103 million in 26 and 102.3 in 27. And then you have the beer tax, which is 12.5, and then we're projecting 13 million in 26 and 27 to the total transfer to the general fund. And we did provide the transfer language for those 2 transfers so that you have the full language of that authority. And then on page 25 is just a graph of the transfers for the liquor and the beer that you can see the breakdown. We also included a pie chart, which is the annual breakout of liquor revenue transfers. So you'll see that 81% of our revenue is transferred to the general fund, 10% is to the Granted Advantage, and 9% is to the Alcohol Abuse Prevention and Treatment Fund. And we would, and then we have our charitable contributions, our awards, and our accolades. And we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yes. Representative Shamrock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question here. Mr. Mollica, do you foresee any concern that this commission, the Ways and Means should have about revenue with the present tariff situation that's going to go on?
Well, at this point, I think there's a lot of talk back and forth, and I noticed that this afternoon that the president and Mexico came to an agreement to hold them off for at least a period of time. We think that eventually, if they're in place and we don't there's not a lot of alcohol that comes through Canada. There is some products that do come through Mexico, but it's a give and take because there's a glut of wine worldwide. There's a glut of wine in California. There's a glut of wine in Europe. There's a glut of wine in South America. In fact, in many areas they're ripping up hectares and hectares of grapes to plant other crops. And we have vats of wine in California just waiting to be bottled. You have a lot of production of brown spirits in the United States, in the southern states, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee in particular. And you have the largest vodka producer in the United States in Tito's in Texas. So even if there may be some adjustments in where people are buying their products and what, if For instance, if Belvedere or Grey Goose goes sky high, then people can buy products that are made in the United States. And we do have a few products right here in New Hampshire that are made and produced here that are very good products as well. So I just think it will be a trade-off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Mullica, I know, and I don't know how far back this goes, but there was a trend at one point away from hard liquor into wine. And you mentioned in your presentation, there's now, it would appear, maybe a trend back the other way, particularly for the sort of the prepared, I don't know I forget what you called it, but, sort of the vodka and orange juice in a can, or, some of these. And I'm just curious about those trends. And I am assuming that the margin on wine is not what it is on distilled spirits. I'm not sure what it would be on the prepared drinks.
Well, the RTDs, are ready to drinks, are what you're speaking about. It's a growing segment of the market. We carry some products in our stores. A lot of those products are malt-based beverages, not necessarily spirits-based. So they go through the beer and wine wholesalers. In fact, anything under 6% goes through the beer and wine wholesalers. And then between 6 and 8, we can dual those products. Anything over 8 goes to the Liquor Commission. But what we're seeing, the real trends is as the baby boomers age out of the market, we're seeing a decline in cupboarding. So the folks for years that bought in bulk and put it away, bought the case sales. That's why we're adjusting what we do as far as sales are concerned. That's one of the biggest pieces. We've consistently ran about 70-30 spirits to wine over the years. The markup on wine does tend to be a little bit higher than it does on spirits, but because of the differentiation in the percentage, it's de minimis because of the overall vast amount of spirits that we do. The biggest three things that we're seeing is the health crisis, because now everybody's on a health kick, and that's fine. We understand that. But between dry January, sober October, and the Surgeon General coming out and telling, regardless of what amount of alcohol you drink, it could cause cancer. That's a huge scare for people. Secondly, the baby boomers aging out of the market, and third, cannabis. Those are all three things that we have to consider.
Can I follow up? Follow up. Just one quick follow-up. And you mentioned cannabis, and this may be sort of outside the scope of this particular committee, but I did hear driving in this morning a story on NPR about, and you had mentioned one of the benefits of state control is the ability to track the quality and make sure that, I guess that was a more significant issue as we came out of Prohibition. But obviously still remains an issue today. And I'm wondering, they brought up the issue of being able to do the same thing for cannabis. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I have to start by saying that the Liquor Commission isn't for or against cannabis, but any cannabis that's sold in the states now, until some type of deregulation is done, has to be grown in that state. So the control is there. So anything that's grown in Maine, Massachusetts, or Vermont is what's sold in that state. You can't cross-border any of it at this point.
And there's a seed to sale tracking system. A seed to sale tracking system so that you can track it from seed to sale.
Those seeds are given a SKU number when they're planted, and that SKU number follows that product all the way to the end product, whether it's used in an edible or whether it's used in flower form. Thank you.
Representative Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. About a year ago, I was invited to a whiskey promotion by the distillers in Ireland, a group of distillers, and it was a year ago or so. And I'm just curious about these things. Do they work? Do they help these companies expand their product, expand their shelf in the state? Are they effective at promoting their products? It's a marketing question, really.
Sure. We've just done and are continuing to do. We started about a year ago with Board Bia, the Irish Trade Council. We sent some folks over there to do some buying of barrels. So we have exclusive products in the United States here in New Hampshire, and we're continuing to work with Board Bia and the Irish Trade Council. We've done the same with Mexico. We've obviously done the same with California and many buying trips over the years, with France, with Italy. There's a huge benefit in these things because what it does, it gives you exclusive products and it builds those relationships with those folks in the wine business, the vintners and or the distillers. And it gives you access to those products that no one else can have. We have many, many, many dozens a year of exclusive barrel buys in this state because of those programs that have been done. So I find them to be very helpful. And its uniqueness, consumers are all about one-upsmanship. If you can get something that no one else has and you can make it available at your home and someone else doesn't have it, that's a big piece of that world. Thank you.
Representative Elmy.
Thank you. I know you've been having to try to understand the cannabis market for quite some time now. Do you have access to any studies that show whether increasing the use of cannabis reduces the amount of liquor and how much effect it would be?
I have hundreds of articles that I'd
I
be happy
figured
to
you
share
would.
with you.
It's interesting in that regard. I've been, you said one of the reasons is all this, the negative about alcohol and, dry Januaries and dry Octobers. At some point, and I don't know if you're seeing it yet, I mean, there's not going to be a surprise when people find out, oh, cannabis isn't good for you either. So when those markets start, have you seen any of that negativity starting yet? Because once it does, that could, mitigate this decline.
Well, I have to give credit to the folks that are in the cannabis production world because only 65% of the people who use cannabis are using edibles. Only 35% are smoking flower. So they took that carcinogen piece of it right out by creating the edibles to be used. And that's what really people are buying. And you have the millennials who buy into cannabis in a big way, don't really buy a lot of alcohol. They buy better than the baby boomers, but they don't buy as much. And the baby boomers are also now the folks that weren't able to use cannabis for years because it was illegal and they could get arrested and they didn't want that sort of a black mark on their history. And now they're using cannabis because of the edibles and not having to smoke it. So there's a lot going on in that world.
Representative Spar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the page 21, the graph there, I was just trying to understand, clarify with me. I understand the gross sales of, let's say, in fiscal year 24, 738.9 million, and the 28% profit is after the expenses in running the operation. What is then the net? What's the net one down here?
So the gross profit is after cost of goods of the cost of the product. The net is after the expenses, operating overhead.
Oh, okay. So the net one is both the cost of the goods and the and the net. Okay, and
Correct.
the expenses of operating.
Yes.
And just to follow up.
Follow up.
Yeah, there's 68 retail stores roughly, or 65.
65.
65. And each one of them has like a separate P&L, and you assess whether it makes sense to continue in one area or not, depending on the P&Ls.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's where we've done a lot of our store changes and consolidations was based off of the profit and loss of those locations.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Ors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. So are we promoting our liquor sales across state lines via billboard and maybe at the same time downplaying cannabis, schizophrenia, psychosis, whatever, or?
Well, we certainly are advertising our liquor stores across state line. Not only do we print advertise still in the Globe, but billboards across Maine and Massachusetts, and as well as social media is the biggest platform that we use, as well as radio. So, and as far as downplaying cannabis, not an area that we're touching.
Follow up?
Follow up?
So when the weather gets warmer, we'd like to see a big display of liquor and alcohol out here on the front lawn, big sample parties. We can hold that. Thank you.
I mean, to follow up on that, are there legal issues with you comparing? I suppose then that becomes problematic because then you're starting to say, well, liquor is better than cannabis, and so that probably brings you into a whole difficult situation.
Quagmire.
Quagmire, yeah.
That's a television program.
Representative Elberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my questions. I actually have one very short one a little bit longer. On page 22, can you describe what accessories means?
That's the mixers and corkscrews and tchotchke type items.
Thank you. I'm not a drinker, so I don't know what all that stuff is. And my next question, on page 13, you talk about curbside pickup. I used to run drunk driving programs. And so I'm wondering what kind of checking is being done with a curbside pickup, both from a perspective of potentially drinking and driving, and also from a perspective of making sure that the person who is picking up the alcohol isn't my 16-year-old grandson, for example, who shouldn't be receiving alcohol at all. So I'd like to hear about that, please.
Sure. The same system that we use in the store is used curbside. So if you you let us know that you're out, the person goes out, checks your ID, makes sure your ID is valid, goes back in and gets your product, and then brings your product out to the car.
Thank you.
And yes, verifies the credit card to the sale as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. Thank you.
We're done. Well, that concludes today's agenda, and see you all tomorrow and Wednesday. Tomorrow we will start at 10 o'clock.